Hello and welcome to today's broadcast, Practical Steps for Fair Chance Hiring in Your Company. As a reminder, this program is valid for one PDC of SHRM credit. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items for our viewers. If at any point during the broadcast you have a question for our presenters, which I hope you will, please use the Q&A widget of your viewing screen to submit your questions. We will cover as many questions as time allows at the end of the presentation, and we'll reach out via email for follow-up if any go unanswered. Additionally, if you're experiencing technical difficulties, you can use the Help widget on the bottom of your screen to request assistance, and a copy of today's slides and additional resources can be found in the Resources folder of your viewing screen. This broadcast is being recorded and will be available for viewing in the next few days. With that, I'll take a moment to introduce our presenters, Tarik Greene of M.A.D.E Transitional Services, Ian Harriman of Checker, and Elizabeth Speck of MindOpen Learning Strategies. Now, most of us are familiar with the fact that 1 in 3 working adults have some kind of criminal record in the U.S., and what Tarik, Ian, and Elizabeth will guide you through today is a discussion around how to best leverage this talent pool by using best practices, implementing practical solutions to ensure that you have an effective fair chance hiring program for your business, and understanding the strong business case for hiring applicants with criminal records. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Tarik to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Rihanna. I appreciate that. Hi, as Rihanna said, my name is Tarik Greene. I am the Deputy Executive Director of M.A.D.E Transitional Service, and I'm the co-founder of M.A.D.E Transitional Services. And M.A.D.E is an acronym for Making a Difference Every Day. And I'm also a person who is formerly incarcerated. And so as I speak to you about this particular topic, I come with a wide range of experience, of course. My professional experience in working with clients who try to navigate, successfully back into society upon their release from prisons, but also come with the personal experience of having attempted so several times over the years. And so one of the most important things that I can speak to you about would be what people go through as they go job hunting with a criminal record. And so job hunting with the record it can be very depressing and discouraging depending on an individual's level of patience and experience, of course. And one of the reasons I say that is because most of our clients or people we work with who have been to prison or who are formerly incarcerated, one of the things that they do while they're incarcerated, or one of the things that most people who are incarcerated or people want to come home, they come home with this desire to do better, to live better lives. They want to school, they want to work, they want to be productive members of society. What happens more times than not, as they're about to work with that excitement, they're told that they can't be hired because they have a criminal background. And in some businesses who are a little more humane in their dealings with the population may say things like, you're overqualified, or they may say things like, we just filled the position, or something like that. Other companies who are not as sensitive are very direct in saying, listen, if you have a criminal background, we just won't even consider hiring someone like you, which of course is illegal and it's out of compliance with the laws. That's all these things that we're referring to. And what is banned in the box and fair chance hiring and second chance? What we're referring to is the laws or the policies and procedures that are in place that are protections, for lack of a better term, are protections for people who are formerly incarcerated. They are a set of policy and procedure and laws that say to an employer, if you discriminate against a person solely based on the fact that they have a criminal background or criminal justice involvement, then that in and of itself is illegal, and it can't be done. So many places have taken what's called the Fair Chance Pledge. Many businesses, many employers, and even some schools, some colleges have taken the pledge that they won't discriminate and that they will, whether they're in a jurisdiction that mandates it or not, that they consider people who have criminal backgrounds. So what's some of the myths and some of the things that we hear? I know that everyone has heard something in some way, shape, or form about ban the box or about fair chance employment. And so what are some of the things that we hear that's just categorically not true? And some of them is that, people feel like when they hear second chance or they hear Fair Chance Act that it means that you have to hire someone as an employer. If someone comes to you with a criminal background, you have to hire them. And that's just not the fact. It's not about having a bleeding heart, and it's not about an expectation for you to take undue risk in your business or in your company. It's not about just low wage paying jobs or low skill entry level positions, and it is certainly not an end to discrimination. It's not an end to racism, and it's not an end to the problems of the world. That's not what's meant by it. And it's not the same in every city or state. Different places have different laws and different policies set up in place depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. I'm sure many of you are in jurisdictions who do support ban the box and probably some who don't support ban the box. So then what is it, right? Fair chance employment, what it really boils down to is retention and performance. And by retention, what we mean is that when you hire from that population, especially when you hire from that population who's gone through extensive and intensive training and who are work ready, what you'll find is that you'll have a much lower turnover rate than other businesses who don't hire from that population. People will stay longer, and you'll notice that you'll be able to retain more of the employees than other businesses who don't hire from that population. It's about loyalty and engagement. We've spoken to a vice president of human resources from Johns Hopkins Health Center who said, listen, we've been hiring from that population for many years, long before it became a fad, and they're good, they're loyal, they're solid workers, and they have the numbers to prove, which is a fact. And if you talk to them, you'll get that same story from many of the businesses that in some of your local jurisdictions as well. The fact of the matter is that discriminatory hiring practice lawsuits, simply stated, are on the rise. Many employees have been brainwashed to believe that if they hire from that population, what they'll receive is negligent hiring lawsuits, that people will come in from the community and say, listen, you hired someone who has a criminal background, and that's negligent hiring. But the fact of the matter, and the lawsuits themselves and the numbers show that negligent hiring lawsuits are very low, whereas discriminatory practices are, according to the EEOC, in 2016, we're at 81,000, which was up from 89,000 a year before, and close to $500 million have already been paid out for discriminatory practices, hiring practices by businesses. And so that's one of the things that is so critical and important about this particular training, is that what this does is this helps any business keep themselves from discriminatory hiring practices, as well as opens the floodgates for talent that is to date basically untapped. But whether you're in a jurisdiction where law has been passed or not, the fact of the matter is that these protections have been put in place is dating as far back as 1964 with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And so, while the laws have been in place, there hasn't been a lot of checks and balances. There hasn't been a lot of enforcement until now. And so, and we're starting to see that, as I stated a minute ago, we're starting to see that more and more in the courts, because more and more places are being brought up on those kind of complaints. So what's the bottom line to this topic? the bottom line here is that fair chance employment definitely is the future. It's an untapped talent pool. We all know, as stated earlier, that 1 in 3 people of working class age have some kind of criminal background, and if a personal policy of an employer is that we won't hire from that population, then you cut yourself just that much more of any jurisdiction that you're in. So it's more than just about being compliant with the law. It's also about doing the best that you can for your company and for your business, getting the best people in place that you can. One of the things that we've noticed is that a lot of companies hire outside places to do their background checks without having any real knowledge or history of the place that they're bringing in. So a lot of those places that run the background check, they run it in a way that becomes very faulty to the job seeker and very faulty by default to the company, because you don't get a chance to experience, or you don't get a chance to consider people who would probably help your bottom line in the business. And so we do know of companies who don't utilize those faulty systems and policies or procedures in doing the background checks. There's companies who are revolutionary in the way that they perform their background checks for companies that will bring you the best possible fit for your job. And here to talk a little bit more about that is N. Harriman of Checker.
Thanks, Tarik. Appreciate the warm intro there. So just really quick on me, my name's Ian from Checker. I'm an account executive here, but more so I've been championing our kind of efforts around fair chance employment and really understanding that space to both bring it to our business here at Checker, and then to also bring it to our customers. So, whether that's in the product or when that's around training or resources, we have a good sense around the pitfalls of criminal records and how those actually weigh into the decisional process, especially now with all the, given complexity that's added through things like ban the box and additional FCRA laws that may come down on a state or county basis. So the real goal of my presentation today is to give you a sense of how the background check can serve as a solution for fair chance employment, and how this will factor into your decision-making process and should enable you to really make the most fair choice possible. So, quick overview of Checker here. This presentation is not about Checker, but thought it would be helpful to give a sense of our breadth of experience and how we've kind of come to a focus on this topic. So in our core, Checker is a software company. We're a software company that is solving problems around the background check process, as opposed to, other vendors in the space that are more service-type companies that run background checks. Those kinds of companies are starting to realize the impact of technology, but we're coming at it from a completely different angle that is born from the idea of innovation and problem solving. So to date, we run over 15 million checks per year. That puts us as one of the biggest vendors by volume. We support over 12,000 customers today. We're NAPBS accredited, totally here in the U.S. All of our employees here at Checker, from applicant support all the way down to sales and compliance, are all here in San Francisco. And finally, the thing I think that's most important to kind of speak to here is that given the logos that you see on this slide here, Checker was born from running background checks on, people that we all know to be our neighbors, our friends, people we run into at the grocery store. And the reason I say that is because, this idea of the future of work, the flex jobs and the on-demand economy, the sharing economy, that kind of focus is where our business was born from, and that gave us a look at everyday people as opposed to white collar versus blue collar, or professional or specialized services. And what we started to do when we were just growing as an infant company was we started to realize that we were now collecting data, from people that, were more common people that we all knew because we, including myself, have all applied to, be a driver on Uber, to deliver some food via Postmates. These kinds of things has really given us a larger breadth of what the day-to-day person is like and how criminal records actually affect those. And the big thing that we saw was that, the background check system in itself, is setting people up for failure if that is something that is determining the status of employment, if they're going to use that as a determining factor. So some of the big existing problems with the background check process today is coverage. So, whether it's best practices or, the kind of report that you run today because it's the most cost-effective, database-driven searches are all over the place. And these kinds of repositories don't ensure maximum possible accuracy. There are about 33 million records in the National Criminal Database today, but only a third of counties here in the U.S. actually report up to that database. So by just using that kind of thing, you're totally cutting out very, very important information, but more so on the completeness side, this is all static. So with all these very positive expungement laws, especially here in California that are going into effect, if people go through due process and do get records expunged, that's not going to be reflected on something like the National Criminal Database. So we've been kind of taught and told to rely on these database searches because it gives us a far reach and far breadth of information, but in no way is it complete, nor does it give us a good amount of coverage. On the complexity side, there's no silver bullet report or sets of reports. And the reason why is because the complexity of charge classification on a state, county, and municipal basis is mind-boggling. The way that some states handle or categorize criminal records is vastly different than the state just next door, or maybe the county next door. Throughout the Midwest, there are counties that look at things like traffic violations as a criminal charge because they don't have a dedicated traffic court that filters it to the DMV. And then if you start thinking of things like arrest records versus actual conviction records, and dismissed records are also in play too, and reportable. So if you're not up to par on what those actually mean, you could be looking at records that may have no bearing at all. And finally, the system is very prejudiced. I think we can all come to some sort of agreement that we have a very, very broken criminal justice system today. And the background check system is a reflection of our criminal justice system. And because here in this country we've had this vast war on drugs and a prison industrial complex that is now deep-rooted, those kinds of results are then fed through to the background check systems and the data that we all look at to make decisions. And because of the pitfalls there, we find it being unfair to people of color especially, and underrepresented minorities. So we're working off of a prejudice system. The newest form of complexity that is going to be coming down, and maybe some of you have already felt it, is ban the box. So, across the board, there's over 150 cities and counties, and now 30 states that have adopted some sort of ban the box policy. So, employers that are considering qualifications and right fit, without the stigma of criminal records, now have to deal with, what goes into ban the box and how to actually deal with that. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but given it's recent here in California, I just wanted to speak a little bit to California's Fair Chance Act. It just went into effect here top of the year, Jan 1. But California as a state has a ban the box policy that's now in effect. However, there are multiple cities and counties across the state of California that have ban the box legislation that are a bit more aggressive or a bit more conservative. So not only do you have to look at this from the state filter, but when thinking especially about LA, Los Angeles, there are vastly more requirements on your end, maybe as a hiring manager or somebody that's considering an applicant, to actually show your work through an individualized assessment and the EEOC's nature time nature test. So I'm just bringing this up as kind of an example to how the complexity, not only across the board, can be a little bit deterring, but as you actually focus in on where you're at or maybe where you're hiring somebody, how those different rules, can actually apply. So without all that being said, how do we build a fair process? And there are a few areas we found to be extremely valuable to understand what you're up against in terms of background checks and how best to make a fair decision. The first is understanding that charge classification and return data. So, how do you handle these different kinds of records? When you see an arrest record versus an actual conviction, what does that mean to you? Are you going to deny somebody gainful employment because they have an arrest record with an unfinished conviction result on there? I'm not sure, but understanding those kinds of differences can help you come to a more fair decision throughout the process. And back to the different kinds of searches, whether they're database searches to county-level searches, how are you actually weighing that information in your decision? Are you taking a database search for what it is, or are you waiting until that county-level search, which should have the most up-to-date information on the applicant? Are you weighing those the same? Those kinds of things need to be thought through and understood, potentially before you even start ordering background checks on applicants. The next is, focusing on relevant records. So, one thing that I always tell my customers or people that are thinking about starting background checks or building a fair chance employment program is to set up your adjudication criteria for either the specific job rec or across the board beforehand. Ideally, you want to set those up on the role-by-role basis kind of rules, because the nature of the job will be different across the board and should maybe have a different spectrum of charges and that you should actually be considering. So setting that up beforehand is key. You also need to keep in mind, you should use your vendor as a resource. So background check vendors by law cannot give legal advice, but what they can do is help you kind of navigate this process. Whether you're trying to understand the difference between potential records, or maybe you've ran a report and you don't understand what is returned. Use your vendor as a resource to help you go through this process of understanding adjudication criteria and how to actually apply that, because that is within their scope. Finally, here, using the individualized assessment exercise as a tool. So, I know I briefly mentioned the EEOC nature time nature test. I'll go into a bit detail here. So, the EEOC set out this analysis to help employers come to a fair decision around an individual with a criminal record. And how you actually do that is you take the nature of the role that the applicant is applying for, and then you measure that against the time of the actual criminal record. So how far back was it? Were they 18 years old, or was it last year? Using the time as a factor there. And then you take the nature of the charges that are on that report, and you measure that against the nature of the role to see if they align. The classic, I think, example here is if you're hiring somebody to be a customer service rep and they have a DUI on their background check report, how does that align to what they'll be doing as a customer service rep? I suppose if they're helping people maybe purchase alcohol, that might be something that crosses the line there. But if you can see what I mean here, the nature of the actual crime there was driving under the influence. But the nature of the role has nothing to do with the vehicle and has nothing to do with decision-making around alcohol. So that kind of criminal charge should be ignored in that sense. And as you go through that analysis and become more comfortable with it, by just going through the motions and going through the exercise, you'll actually find that the answer to that problem, pops out easier than you may have thought, or maybe easier than how you started at the beginning. So use this exercise as a tool to come to the best decision possible. It's something I preach across the board, is being consistent and transparent. So on our end, I know Checker may be a bit different than the vendors that you all use today, but we provide data through our product to help cut out bias. So we highlight the historical decision-making data so that you know when you've adverse action somebody for something and when you haven't, to really see those trends and to keep yourself accountable. If, the past 10 applicants that have a petty theft charge you've hired and for some reason this one is a stickler for you and you want to adverse action them, check yourself a little bit, because there's tons of unconscious bias that flows through all of us, and without something objective like data to really keep us accountable, it's hard to use ourselves to police ourselves, if you will. And finally, transparency. So, don't be afraid to have honest conversations with your applicants and candidates. Don't feel like the background check, the finished background check is kind of like the end of the road in terms of that communication with the applicant. Discuss their evidence of rehab, which are the steps that they've taken after conviction or the arrest to make up for what has happened, to show that there has been growth after that incident. The context around everything involved is going to be extremely valuable. So going back to EEOC nature, time, nature, right? Like, how old was the individual? Were they in college when this happened? Were they too young to understand kind of what was actually going on and the implications of that? You need to use this information advantageously and be transparent about it, because what you'll find is that the background check will paint a particular picture about somebody, but by having a transparent conversation, you'll start to color in that picture and really see who the individual is, and that in itself will map to who you want to hire versus who you won't. We're all human beings, and that social side of things won't come out if you're just relying on something like a background check. At the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing, right? We want to hire people quickly and fairly and grow our businesses and give people opportunity. And applicants, want a chance and an opportunity to improve their lives through employment. So if we all want the same thing here, use transparency as a way to achieve that goal. So that's all I have in terms of how you can kind of use the background check process to help enable a fair chance hiring program. Who I'd like to pass the ball to here is Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth is founder and principal of MindOpen Learning Strategies, and Elizabeth creates incredibly engaging training programs and experiences for business. So she's got a really fun case study to take us through. So I'm going to pass the ball off to Elizabeth.
Great. Thanks, Ian. And we've had some great times actually walking through some cases together. I have had the honor to work with M.A.D.E Transitional Services to create training for employers about how to identify, how to cut through bias, and how to leverage the 1 in 3 population that has a criminal record. We know that there's been a lot of attention given to training folks who may be coming out of prison, but the truth is that this involves behavior change for everyone, and there can be a long road between policy or best practice and actual practice on the ground once you get into the day-to-day hustle and bustle, competing priorities that all of us know that we go through in the workplace. So what we're going to do today, and what Ian, Tarik, and I believe is important, is kind of building that muscle to be able to make an objective assessment that balances risk and opportunity. So let's take it for a spin. So I'd like to introduce you to Ron and Delores. Ron is a small business owner. He has an independent hardware store. His longtime store manager recently retired, and he's looking for his next right hand, who he hopes will help him take his business into the 21st century, really help him to maintain excellent customer service, and help him get home and spend more dinners with his family, who have not liked how much he's needed to be at work recently. And Delores is now the finalist for the manager position. She has met with folks on Ron's team. She's impressed them. She has a great personality, and she's got a lot of knowledge. She's got an associate's degree in computer science, but she also has a really good retail background. She's been 3 years as a store manager with a major technology retail chain, and she was employee of the year. She was laid off when the chain was bought out in 2015. And one of the things that the team had noticed but not spoken to Delores about yet is that she hasn't really been able to find a steady job since she lost that job. So they're kind of wondering what's up with that. She's had a number of part-time hourly wage jobs. So at this stage, Delores is the finalist, and Ron is going to walk through a process to help ensure that he's weighing appropriate information at each step. And Ron actually does not live in a jurisdiction that has adopted ban the box. Certainly, like everybody else, he is subject to EEOC guidance. But if it weren't for a workshop that he went to at his local Chamber of Commerce, this would not have occurred to him to actually do some steps to protect himself and to be prepared for when people who may have records or when something may be flagged on a background check. So, as a result, he no longer has the box on his job application. He also no longer runs a credit check, and he doesn't ask to run the background check until he's got finalist candidates. So before posting his job description, he took a fresh look at it, and he noted what kinds of criminal charges he thought would be relevant to the job duties. And this is his risk analysis. So obviously, for a manager, this person will have lots of independence, access to cash, access to the store. They will be interacting in sensitive situations with customers. So he's decided that the areas of offenses that he would want to be aware of would be theft, drugs, deception, assault, violence. And something that he also learned, and that is helpful to keep in mind, is that there's a certain point where the risk that someone who does not have a criminal record will commit a criminal offense while employed. That risk is about the same as somebody who has a previous conviction. The risk of them reoffending is no greater than that for someone who actually has no criminal history on record. So a frequently cited study has found that the time when that levels out is 7.7 years for robbery, 3.8 years for burglary, and 4.3 years for aggravated assault. And this study deliberately looked at some of the offenses that are considered violent offenses. So again, using that data to be able to make an objective assessment. So Step 2 for Ron is now it's time to request that criminal record check. And he has Delores sign off as appropriate, and he figures it's smooth sailing from here, and he'll have his manager in place soon. 2 days later, he receives a report from his background screening vendor. And let's say he may be working with a screener like Checker, who knows ahead of time what he wants to be alerted to. Or he might be working with another vendor that gives him everything. But at any rate, this is what he's got. And it's in real life, it's often as hard to read as you see up here on the screen. And I know there are many folks here who have reviewed many criminal history reports, and you know that they can also look different if they come from different vendors. So how do you cut through the noise and actually see what you need to see? So what Ron was able to surmise here is that he's got some hits. So there is a purchase of controlled substances that's back from 2008, and then there is also a theft charge from also, let's see, I'm having a little trouble reading it myself. I have to check my paper, from 2006. So this is what Ron first thought when he saw this. He's really upset. He feels like probably he can't hire her. So some things that may not be repeatable here. I really liked her. And then why didn't she say anything? I'm a fair guy. She could have told me. She basically lied by not saying anything. You know, once a drug addict, always a drug addict. And he sees maybe that's why she hasn't been able to get a job these last 3 years. Maybe she's even done some things that haven't showed up on her report. And then he can't afford to hire somebody and have to fire him. He doesn't want to take this risk. So now that he's had a chance to kind of discharge these feelings, write them down, or just think them to himself and acknowledge them, he can also ask himself, okay, what is based on my assumptions here? What's based on some of my human knee-jerk reactions? And what do I need to do now in order to be objective and to protect myself from potential discrimination? So he needs to get some information from Delores. So at this point, because Ron is not subject to policy that's particular to his locality, he has a letter that he has developed based on the legal requirements that he's been informed about, and he tells Delores that there are crimes on the report that are relevant to the job at hand, that this is not an automatic disqualifier, and that at this point he welcomes further information that would help to make this decision. And this can also be the point where if the report is erroneous, the candidate has a chance to try to rectify that or to say, like, this isn't me. But in this case, Delores responds right away, and she says, yep, it is accurate. And furthermore, she responds to him and says, between the years of 2005 and 2008, I went through a series of personal setbacks that were interconnected with drug addiction. My arrest and conviction in 2008 was a wake-up call, and I underwent treatment while incarcerated. I gained insight into the roots of my struggles with substance abuse, and I've been in recovery ever since. I've taken responsibility for my crimes, including paying fines and restitution, and I've continued my education and skills training since I came out of prison. I was discharged early from parole in 2013 and have had no contact with the correctional system since then. And then she goes on to say, please see attached. And here's where she's included that evidence of rehabilitation, which was mentioned earlier. So she's got a copy of her Employee of the Year certificate. She's got a letter of reference from her former supervisor. She's got a letter of support from her former parole officer, a copy of her diploma, of her certificates, and a copy of a completed substance abuse support group. So she closes by saying, I hope to hear from you. Now Ron's job is to decide and document, or document and decide. So he's doing this nature time nature test. So he's going to look at the theft by receiving stolen property charge or conviction. That could be considered a less serious offense because it's a misdemeanor. And we see that it's been 12 years since the offense. At the same time, it's an extremely relevant conviction. And so, noted. Now he's looking at the purchase of controlled substance conviction. That's a felony. She served state prison time. It's a serious offense. She's been out of prison since 2010. And, Ron's first gut is that the drug problems could go to theft and deception. This opportunity is relevant, but at the same time, if he makes a decision based on past drug use, then he is really at risk of a discrimination suit, both with Americans with Disability Acts and the EEOC requirements. So now that he's done that quick test, he can do an individualized assessment that involves other aspects as recommended by the EEOC. So he's got information here about the facts and circumstances. She shared that with him. The fact that she was an adult, that she was in her 30s at the time of her conviction, actually works in her favor because research has shown that recidivism is less likely at a certain age. She's also clearly participated in rehabilitation efforts. And perhaps most importantly here, she has performed relevant work successfully with no known criminal conduct. Her employment history seems that it's been a bit spotty over the last few years, but that's balanced by her long and successful stints previously. She's provided character references. What we don't know, and we can probably assume at this point that she's not, is whether she's bonded under a federal, state, or local bonding program. And that is a program where the Department of Labor basically makes it possible for businesses and for employees to receive free liability insurance for the first 6 months of hiring, so that there's no risk to the employer. And that is an opportunity that Ron could take if he so decides. So in this case, he's good to go. He has made the decision to hire. He can also take the opportunity, if he wishes, to have that honest conversation with Delores. It might be an opportunity to say, hey, why didn't you tell me? And chances are, thinking about the stories that Tarik shared with us, she might say something like, well, I've had so many situations where I just don't hear back, or people make up another reason or another excuse not to hire me. I figured, let's let the chips fall where they may, and I felt nervous, and that's why I didn't bring it up. So it seems like they will be off to a very positive relationship. And we'd like to bring to your attention other really helpful resources for businesses, including about the federal bonding program that we spoke about, as well as the work opportunity tax credit. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Rahana.
All right, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and to Ian and Tarik for your portions of the presentation. To our audience, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't submitted a question yet, there's still time. We have a few minutes left here to take some of the questions that we've gotten throughout the presentation. So the first one here, I believe this is directed at you, Ian. It asks, in regard to the background check, our vendor today reports everything back to us, including arrest records and conviction records. Is that compliant, and can we change that?
Thanks, Rahana, and great question. So I know this is an answer people don't typically like to hear, but it definitely depends. So I would say your best route here is understanding the state that you're in and what is reportable and what is not. California, for example, you cannot use arrest records as part of the decision. So what I would do in that kind of scenario is one, first and foremost, decide if arrest records are, something that even matters to you. And if they're not, then regardless of if they're reported or not, then that's something that you can kind of navigate internally in terms of your hiring decisions and maybe policies. And then second to that, I would say, have a transparent conversation with your vendor. If you do find out that they shouldn't be reporting those kinds of records to you, you got to call them out on that, because that's something that could get you both in a lot of trouble. And just given how the background check industry, has been for the last decade or so, those kind of problems do pop up all the time. Given that this is the scenario, I would also recommend to the attendee that asked that question, also start checking on, how far back they're reporting records. We do find trends that if they are reporting records outside of the scope, then they're also likely not getting the time portion right as well. So not a clean answer there, but that's how I would at least approach solving that problem.
All right, thank you so much. The next question, I believe, is for Tarik and Elizabeth. How do we communicate with customers about fair chance employment? I think some of them may have, trying to say issues with criminal records. How would you guys communicate that?
So I can speak to that. We're hearing more and learning more about how businesses are communicating to their customers, and in a lot of cases, expectations that there will be concerns are turn out not to be founded. But I think that with any business, you know your customers, and for some people, announcing that you are compliant with fair chance hiring and that you are, really endorsing fair chance employment or signing the pledge, that is the right thing to do. And for others, it's part of what you're doing because it's legal and it's good practice, and it might not be something that you share. But I think it's becoming more known in the general public that people who have been incarcerated need to work, that everyone in our society needs folks who have been caught up in the mass incarceration addiction to work, and that it's good for all of us, and that someone who's choosing to use fair chance strategies isn't necessarily doing something different from another business.
All right, thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Our next question asks, you're not really saying we should hire murderers, are you? And I'll leave it to you guys to decide who should take that one.
I think I'll defer over to you guys on that one.
All right, I'll take it in. This is Tarik again, and so that is the exact thing that we were addressing in the slide, where we were saying that you're not expected to expose your company to undue risk, and you're not expected to have a bleeding heart. However, we're not saying that if a person has a murder as a conviction, that definitely you should not hire. It all depends on the position that the person is applying for. It depends on the person's qualifications. And it depends on what's the best fit for your job. What we're trying to say, and what we're saying all over the, all over the country where we adopt this law, is that regardless of what a person's conviction was from the past, what you're looking at are signs of rehabilitation. You're looking for what's the best fit for your company, the person's qualifications, and so on and so forth. So it's not about the charge, whether you should or should not hire, unless that charge is related directly to the position that they are applying for, and you feel that it might expose people to undue harm. Aside from that, it's not about the charge. It's about, the qualifications and other circumstances.
Thank you, Tarik, for bringing some. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Just to add a little bit, some of the people who I've met doing this work, who have served long, decades, 20, 25-year sentences and who have survived that and who have become leaders within the prison community and then have come out have been the most contributing employees, strong leaders, the people who sadly have been there long enough to earn perhaps master's degrees while inside. And this can be a really unique population that adds a lot of value to the workplace. And so I think that, remembering when we're talking about fair chance employment, it's not one size fits all, and the population is extremely diverse, and you never know who your next best hire is going to be.
Yeah, thank you both for those perspectives, extremely valuable. And I think that this next question actually rolls into kind of how can we be actionable in terms of making sure that we're seeing the full picture when we're looking at fair chance hiring practices. So this next question, which Ian, I'll send your way, is what's the best way to determine what charges are relevant to the nature of the role?
Yeah, great question there. So, as both Elizabeth and Tarik kind of communicated there, the nature of the actual role and how it relates to the crime are, of course, key. But how you kind of determine that, I think, really starts with, the job role within itself in terms of like the function it'll have with your business, and then from there, feel free to even look at the job rec. Like, what are you requiring in terms of like the expectations for that individual? What's the nature of the purpose of that role? Maybe that's the best way to think about it. Is what's the purpose of bringing somebody into a function like that? And by then taking that purpose and then looking at all the different kinds of criminal charges that could apply there, I think that's where you do take that, you set up that adjudication criteria. So if you're a checker customer, we do supply the adjudication matrices on our platform for you, so you can go through that motion. But if not, I would just open up a spreadsheet, ask your vendor for an understanding of like bucketed kinds of crimes. They should be able to give that to you, and then from there, just ask like, hey, this customer service rep or this salesperson, this finance person, that actual purpose of the role, what kinds of things would be an inherent risk around that particular kind of role. I would try to exclude as much as possible things like, people-to-people interactions and skills, because that's just inherent in working with an office, right? So, really focus on like what you're expecting that person to do and the purpose of the role. And then I think it'll become really clear like what kinds of crimes relate, right? So any kind of like fraud or insider trading, those kind of things, like that's not going to line up with a finance role. And back to my example around motor vehicle reports and DUIs, it'll start to become clear like what kinds of crimes actually relate. And then from there, you can kind of use your own internal HR policy to help dictate the rest. But get other people involved, start having this kind of conversation with people, and all the different perspectives or stakeholders in terms of this actual, this hire or this job rec will then start to create, the actual nature of the job, which will then be really easy to understand nature of crime. So a little bit elongated there, but you're going to have to be thoughtful about it to really get the correct answer.
Thanks so much, Ian. One more question on the. Sorry, Tarik, did you have something to add there?
You know what? I do want to say to that, but I also want to be very careful. I don't want people to, to go gun ho with what I'm going to say. But always, feel free to speak to your prospective employer as well. Like, let's not rule them out completely. And I say that because I happen to know of a case where everything was followed, to the letter of the Fair Chance Act, and this particular individual had a burglary on the record. And so the employer called him in and actually asked him about it, what was the circumstances. And the fact of the matter is that the individual had, he was 17 or 18, had gone to a school that was abandoned, been closed for about 15 years. And his friend to the school and was drinking, and they got caught in the school, and it was called a burglary. It doesn't reduce the fact, it doesn't reduce the fact that the crime question about it. But when you speak to people directly about what it is you want to know, sometimes you can get your answer to that way as well.
Absolutely, kind of using the opportunity to get the full picture of the crimes and the circumstances. I definitely encourage employers to do that. Our next question, let's move into kind of the actionable things that folks who are employers who are ready for fair chance hiring within their jobs. The next question asks, my company has locations and staff in multiple locations that have different laws. How could we go about putting a program in place when it might be different for different states? Can you all speak to some practical steps for putting various programs together for fair chance employers?
Yeah, sure, I could speak to that. You don't know what you don't know. So pushing out some messaging that is across all segments of the organization to reinforce that this approach to hiring is being enforced in some areas, but is coming to all areas, and giving some company aligned values, and then giving the leeway and the respect that different kinds of work and different localities are going to need to figure out the practices that work for them. But at the heart of it is this idea of using data, of knowing your local laws, and of building in a practice, a procedure and a process to protect against bias or protect against sloppy procedures that could put you at risk. And so, not to talk up our training per se, but what we've seen over the over the years, where this has become a really timely topic, is that there's a lot of training out there that is about the law and about what you have to do to be in accordance with the law, but not a lot about the behavior change, the real practices that may need to shift, and the real, building of those muscles and involving others in that. Because what can happen often, and, we all know this from any kind of organizational change, is that a few people are on it, and a few people need to do it all the time, but then other people may be involved in the process, and they may not be on the same page. So our approach is to have a cross-section of people from different areas of the business look at some case studies together that may not apply to their daily work, but to do that as a way to build a common language, a common muscle, and then to go from there and really hash out some particular scenarios that may come up given the nature of the work and the locality in folks' particular areas. That's a great question.
Perfect. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think we have time for one more here, and this looks like it's coming from an audience member who's local to Checker. We're headquartered here in California, so this question I'll send to Ian. I'm in Culver City, California. How should I approach the new ban the box requirements?
Awesome. I grew up in Southern California as well, so glad to hear we got some reach down there in the webinar today. Great question. So I know I mentioned it a bit earlier in my portion of the presentation, but California now has its new Fair Chance Act in place. But Los Angeles actually has been ahead of the game for some time, and their policy in Los Angeles County really revolves around individualized assessment. So same rules are going to apply, right? Like you cannot consider or ask about criminal history until a conditional offer has been made. But to add some teeth into that, what's in the LA regulation is that you also have to provide proof of your individualized assessment, and along with that, you should be doing that nature analysis. So have somewhere, at least for Checker customers, you can leverage the individualized assessment feature that we have to document all of this, and it's made for audit purposes. But I don't know of any other background check vendor that does that kind of thing. So what you should do is, attach to that employee's file and have that along with the actual finished background check. Have your assessment criteria and the thought process you went about to get to your decision, and that's whether you're going to move forward with the individual or not. I think today hiring managers and HR need to just start getting into the rhythm of doing this kind of exercise and documenting it as much as possible, because similar to how Ban the Box kind of caught fire across the country, LA and New York both have the teeth in their regulation that require this written individualized assessment to show as proof. So, the more forward-thinking areas are going to do this. So for you in Culver City, just document all of this, have it with the employee background check and employee file, and that'll keep you compliant across the process.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I want to take a moment to thank our presenters, Tarik, Elizabeth, and Ian. And thank you again to our audience for your attentiveness. I want to be respectful of your time, so we will close out. Before I do so, I just want to say that understanding that the complexities of fair chance hiring range from effectively accessing the best talent, avoiding discrimination suits, and remaining in legal compliance, which is all going to vary by jurisdiction. We do encourage you all to contact M.A.D.E, who presented with us today, to go beyond scratching the surface and leveraging the workforce of the future. So if you want more information on that, you can contact M.A.D.E to customize a training for your company's unique needs, and you can contact them at training@MADE-transitions.org. That's training at MADE-transitions.org. Thank you guys so much for your attention, and we hope to see you again soon.